Okay, we're here with Adam Tirapelle. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you're certainly famous in Illinois for wrestling at the University of Illinois, but you came from California, and I don't know if you were the first to start that pipeline of California to Illinois, but how did this get started for you? I mean, you have a huge wrestling family. Your dad and your uncle were coaches, but how did you get involved at an early age in the sport?
So, like you said, my dad was my coach. He wrestled in high school because his brother, who was 2 years older, I want to say, but only a year in school, was out for the team. And so that's how my dad ended up going out for the team. And he was tiny. He weighed like 80 pounds and, had a lot of energy, was always getting in little trouble. So wrestling kept him busy and was able to use wrestling as sort of a springboard to continue on to junior college and then eventually college, and then came back and was a teacher, and somebody basically begged him to do the wrestling coaching job. He didn't want to do it, so he ended up doing it. And if you know my dad, he's very competitive. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. And 35, 40 years later, he head coached all of us and continued coaching, and finally retired. I said he's down to about 90% of the effort he used to give now as a retired guy.
Now, did he start at Clovis?
No. So we started. My parents are from Placerville area, between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe, and we grew up in Sacramento. My dad taught at an inner city school, Hiram Johnson, in Sacramento, and we went there because he taught there, and that's where the wrestling program was, and that's where everything was at. So we grew up in a very very diverse background. Enjoyed the experience. Had kids sleep over at our house when I was a little kid. On the team because their parents. My dad wasn't sure if their parents would get up and bring them to the tournament in the morning. So it was a good. It was a really really good experience. And so that's where I did most of my wrestling until I was a senior in high school, and then we ended up moving down to the Clovis area. My dad got a job down here, and then that's where my brothers ended up going through Clovis High.
I didn't realize you went there for the first 3 years. I thought you went just your first year, then transferred. So you spent most of your time at that first high school.
I did, yeah. Yeah, grew up, born and raised Hiram Johnson, and all the way through my junior year, and then my senior year, my family wanted to move. My dad put a lot of effort into wrestling program and youth program, and I mean, when you're doing it yourself, any coach would tell you it wears you out. It's hard to keep doing it over and over again. So I have a younger sister who was playing volleyball and softball at the time, and then I have two younger brothers, and then he just couldn't see himself putting in that same time and effort into doing it all for them, and city schools were struggling a little bit in Sacramento, so I had the opportunity to move down to the Clovis area and always liked the area, so that's how my family ended up down here.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in the Midwest, small farm town of about 6,000, and from what I hear, Clovis in that area is kind of like Midwest country to an extent, like farmland.
Yeah, very much. Most people think of Southern California and Bay Area when they think of California, and that is obviously a large percentage of the population. But Central Valley is very much it's about as Midwest as you can get in California.
Yeah,
and that's our area. Very big agriculture we call it the Central Valley of California, between the two mountain ranges and the coast. Said tons of agriculture here. Raisins, grapes, almonds, tons of the world's almonds come from here. So yeah, that's the area, and it's very much like I said, it's very much as Midwestern as you're going to get for California.
Sure, maybe not the winters, but all the good qualities, right? The blue collar, tough labor, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I said, more of a family atmosphere. I know Clovis in particular, a lot of families move to the area just because of the schools and because of the involvement in sports, and not just sports, but it's band, it's everything. It's all the extracurricular, and everybody's involved.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Now, one thing I couldn't tell from doing the research was, at a young age, did you wrestle because you were kind of forced to, and that you learned to love it, or did you love it first and then your dad said, okay, he loves it, let's go all in on this? How did that all kind of transpire?
So my family's a little bit different, especially for, today's day and age where it's all about doing what you want and having fun, and I'm not going to force my kid to do anything. Like, that wasn't how we grew up, and I'm sure a lot of the Midwesterners didn't grow up that way either. You don't just wake up and do what's fun every day. So I wrestled because my dad did it, and I was around it, and I didn't always love it. I'm sure there were times where I wanted to do other things, and so other things are more fun. But it was just sort of expected in my family that, hey, you're gonna wrestle. But there was never really a lot of pressure to win or to be the best. I was very competitive and wanted to be good. But it wasn't about winning. It was about, putting forth a good effort, practicing, competing, giving a great effort, in practice and on the mat. And, later you learn that, it's probably more for life skills than it is for, being a great wrestler. I mean, as much fun as it is to win a state championship or national championship or even Olympic, championship, it's really not an end game. It's the development process, and you enjoy doing it. And I use a lot of those skills now. So
yeah, no, I absolutely. I think that's the whole theme of the podcast, is that the lessons you learn go way past the sport, and we'll get into that near the tail end of this. But I'm curious. You're obviously a super competitive guy, and I've even heard you say in interviews that sometimes you have to be on the extreme of, like, not crazy, but a little bit crazy to get the results you want. And yeah, I know you're like that as a coach, but as a wrestler, when did that first click in for you, where, I don't know if it was like middle school or high school, where you said, this is all consuming, it's all I care about, I'm 100% in? When did that happen for you?
Oh, probably high school. Started wanting to, had certain goals. And I mean, I think what you've heard me say is that a lot of the elite level athletes have a very obsessive compulsive type behavior to them. Almost, not quite like you see on a daytime talk show where maybe you got to touch the door handle 10 times or whatever. But it's very singularly focused. My wife would tell you that I'm very singularly focused. I get on something and, like, that's all I'm doing. So but that helps in sports, because you have goals and you see it every day, and it drives you, and it's all you think about, because you're very singularly focused. You're not multitasking and doing all kinds of different things. So I would say high school, though. Wanted to be a state champ. Just missed my sophomore year. Had a sort of countdown my whole junior year about hey, I'm going to win it this year, and everything kind of drove toward that. But every year you learn to work harder, and that last year maybe you weren't doing as much as you thought you could, and then you get into college and realize you really weren't doing anything. You could have been doing a whole lot more, and you aren't nearly as good as you thought you were. So every steps or every different level is a step, and the guys that ended up being good have like I said, they're a little bit obsessed with their goals, and almost the other thing that's kind of funny, I mean, you could laugh about it, it's comical, is that a lot of the guys who end up good are, like, I don't know how to put it other than they're almost like so dumb that they can't accept that they're not that good. Like, we had a bunch of guys that, I mean, they're just really not great wrestlers, but, like, they thought they were great. And so no matter how bad they got beat, like, every day they'd come back the next day and be like, you got lucky. Like, today's my day. And it's like, dude, you just got hammered yesterday. Like, you got pinned 100 times. What are you talking about? But it's kind of that mindset that, they just have this fervent belief in themselves that, they're not going to get swayed by not having the success they want, getting beat in practice. So a lot of guys give up because, hey, they realize kind of, smartly how hard it is. And then you get these guys that ended up being really, really great. And I don't think it was necessarily that they were any better, probably worse than some of the guys that gave up, but they just believed in themselves. And they just always thought that, man, you got lucky the last 100 days. Like, day 101, like, that's my day.
Man,
so it's kind of funny, but it's true.
The power of self-belief is something that I don't think we as humans will ever fully understand, but someone like you who's been at the elite level as a competitor and now as a coach, I mean, just while we spend a few seconds here, I mean, do you think there are limits, right? Because you or I probably couldn't play in the NBA just because of physical limitations. But, I mean, like, where do you think the limit is with self-belief and just how influential that can be on a given goal?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've seen it work wonders. That the guys, like I said, who there are tons of talented guys who give up, along the way for any number of reasons. Some legit, some maybe not so legit. School, girls, grades, partying, whatever. I mean, and the list goes on and on and on. But the guys who make it just sort of keep coming back and again, not getting beaten down. I follow David Taylor on his social media, and obviously a lot of the other elite level guys. I mean, dude, all they talk about is, it's like they're brainwashing themselves, that they're the best. They believe in themselves so much. No one believes in me more than I believe in myself. And I think it pushes you to limits. I do believe in limits. I'm not a without limits guy. Like I said, I think we all have a range, a much larger range than we give ourselves credit for.
Right.
As far as, what you can do in life. Some guys were just born with 2 left feet, and they just aren't very athletically talented. And I don't believe that those guys could be Major League Baseball players or, NFL stars but you do have a wide range, and that self-belief and things like that, the obsessive behavior, the willing to push yourself beyond, normal limits can help you get to the top of your own. I mean, I don't think no matter what I did, I was going to play in the NBA, but with the same type of attitude and effort that I had in wrestling, maybe I could have been a pretty good basketball player for what I had, for being 5'6", and, but that's kind of that's just how I see it.
Yeah, no, I think it's well said, because certainly there are limits, and it's a dangerous thing to think that there aren't, but at the same time, putting any type of cap on it can be dangerous as well. I mean, just think about all the guys. Tervel Delagnov comes to mind, where very average high school career, did better at the end, but no one in a million years would have said 2-time Olympian. And so it just, those stories are countless in wrestling. We can all count a bunch of them on our hand. And then, speaking of limits, how much more did you have to give once you got around Mark Johnson and John Heffernan back in the day? Like, did you ever think that, like, your first month there and realize, holy crap, I was under-indexing by X% throughout high school? Or was it something you just didn't know how much further you could go?
I think you just don't know. If you if you ask someone if they're working hard, like, no matter who it is at what age, they'll say yeah, because they just don't really know how much harder they could work. I mean, you always think you're working hard, right? It's like, are you a good driver? Everybody says I'm a good driver. Well, I'm at least better than average. Well, if everybody's better than average, then that doesn't make any sense, because there's got to be an average, right? So you always think that you're working hard until the next year, the next level, and you find out, man, I could have been doing so much more. Like, I really wasn't working that hard. But that's part of the process. I mean, it's hard to go from, a regular 10-year-old to, college level training. I mean, that's why everything's a process. So yeah, when I got to Illinois, everything was just that much more intense. I think a lot of it was the people you're around. Everybody there wanted to be successful, had goals. I mean, it's not a high school program where you got a couple guys who are into it, and some not so into it, and some aren't sure really why they're there. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody had goals and wanted to be successful, and I think that's part of what makes the college experience so tough. But it is a rapid or a massive change from high school, and why so many guys don't make it.
Well, especially back then when you didn't have this youth academy scene that we have now, it was truly a huge difference. Did you go through any moments your first, and I know you went to Stanford first, so you had a year under your belt there, but did you go through any moments when you got to Illinois where you're kind of alone by yourself, questioning yourself? I mean, talk to us about that if you did.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I'll give you my story that I told at the high school this year. I was asked to speak to the graduating seniors moving on to college in all sports, not just wrestling. And this is a story that I tell because I want them to know how much more difficult it's going to be at the next level. And if you want to have success, you got to be willing to push through these type of things. So the first college match I'd ever seen, I was a junior in high school. It was, I think it was on VHS, and it was me and my high school buddy, and I think it was Iowa State, and we watched it on VHS, or on tape delay. It was probably not even during the season. So that's how familiar I was with college wrestling, and my dad was a coach, but we just didn't have it around, in California. So I got to Illinois. You mentioned I was at Stanford for a year, so I did have a little bit of experience. And the first practice we ever had was on a Thursday, and we'd done our preseason, and we had Thursday practice. And I'll never forget, went with 3 or 4 guys, and all 8-10 minute typical 12-minute Mark Johnson matches, regular matches. He just says go, and then you just wrestle until he says stop, which he's bad with time. It seems to go on and on and on. So I didn't get a takedown. Didn't score a point. Literally didn't score the entire Thursday. And this is my second year. Like, I'm thinking I'm going to start for the team and want to be an All-American this year. And so I was, of course, distraught. Like, man, I didn't score. But kind of like I said earlier, I was a little bit one of those guys. Like, hey, you got lucky. Like, this is my first day. Like, tomorrow I'm gonna be ready. So we get to practice on Friday. Didn't score again. Did the same thing. Couple partners. Didn't score. I mean, you're talking like this is like 25, 30 minutes of wrestling, right? And you can't get a takedown. You can't score a point. And so I'll never forget, we came down to the locker. Like I said, this is the story I told. We came down to our lockers, and we had our name tags. They'd made up our name tags, and Tirapelle and Lockhart and all the guys were on the team. And I looked at that thing, and I just put it in the locker, shut the door. And I wasn't trying to make this big thing. It was just like, I mean, I remember being so disappointed. I looked at the name tag, and I'm like, I'm not putting that up. Like, we got one more practice in the morning. We had Saturday morning practice, and that was going to be the last practice of the week, kind of the first week to get 3 hard days in. And I said, if I don't score tomorrow, like, it's not going up. I'll put this up when I can actually score a point. I'm not even really part of the team. So I put it in my locker, came in Saturday, didn't score. Didn't score on Saturday.
What? We're talking not a takedown, nothing, even on like the C-string guys?
Nothing. Couldn't do anything.
God.
So, again, you're talking about you said, just a different level. And it said 3 days. I went, didn't score a point. And that was a long weekend, reassessing, But, I mean, I was, like I said, I was a little bit of that, pretty confident and, just could always turn it around that now tomorrow's going to, it's going to be different on Monday. And I did score finally on Monday, put my name tag up on Monday and, or nameplate up in my locker. And the thing is, I ended up a round away from placing that year. I was top 12 in the country, almost made All-American. So you can make gains, but a lot of people give up, at the first sign of adversity. Or, I mean, this is my second year, and I was obviously fairly good in high school. So, I mean, some of the guys, I have tons of respect for my teammates. I mean, we have guys on the team that, I mean, they just got their ass kicked for, months, a year, 2 years, sometimes 2 years. And, I mean, those guys keep coming back, like tons of respect for them. And, and then eventually they ended up being pretty good college wrestlers. But, that's the experience. The guys that are now, again, you got these wrestling academies and you do have kids that come in ready to compete at that level. But back in my day, you'd be lucky if there was 5 freshmen in the country that could wrestle as true freshmen and have any type of impact, like 5 total in any school. And nowadays, there's 20,
every
25,
school,
30.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Now, did Mark or Coach Heffernan have any idea that you were struggling, or they just kind of knew you'd go through that and just kind of let you handle it on your own, or they approach you and?
Yeah, no, they. I think they knew, But again, that's part of the. I mean, wrestling's it's a fighting sport, man. You kind of got to see how people handle things. And one of those first couple of days, I remember I kind of almost got in a fight with one of the guys on our team, and I remember Mark was sitting there, like, I mean, this is typical wrestling, right? Like every other sport, they'd be like jumping in, break it up. And I kept shooting, and he kept down blocking with his head. So we kept shooting into each other's head. And I can't remember what happened, but basically he started giving me a hard time. And I was like, why don't you effing shoot? Like, do something. And we kind of started going back and forth. Like, hey, this might get a little bit.
Yeah.
And Johnson's literally, I'm not kidding, he's 5 feet from us on the wall. And he's just like smiling. He's just like, let's see what happens here.
Oh.
Let's see how this goes. But I mean, that's college wrestling. That's Division I wrestling. And, we kind of like, we were pissed, but kind of just settled down and then freaking started wrestling again. I mean, that's what it's like in those rooms. But I remember he was standing right there, and he was just like, kind of see how this goes.
Man. Now, a lot of people don't know that Illinois, before Mark Johnson got there, was absolutely in oblivion to college wrestling. Like, they were pretty low on the radar, and Mark had actually gone out to Oregon State, I believe, first,
Yep.
where Gutches was at, and he brought that team, really high up quickly. They actually got second in the country the year he left, or the year after he left. Of course, he had been with Gable for all those years during that amazing run. What do you, and now you're a coach yourself, one of the best coaches in the country, but what do you think back to, Coach Johnson and, what he was able to do to Illinois and to you guys? I mean, shit, your senior year, you had finals. That's unheard of for Illinois wrestling before, or even now, unfortunately. But, like, what do you think, what was it about Coach Johnson in terms of his leadership or his coaching that really got guys bought in and excited about the program?
I think you said it. I think it's leadership. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot from him as a coach, and what things matter. My dad obviously taught me a lot as well.
Sure.
But Johnson was not the greatest wrestling mind in the country,
right,
by any means. I mean, I think he would tell you that. He'd laugh. We used to laugh and say that, the only thing he could do was front headlock and squeeze and choke you out, or double underhooks. I mean, obviously he was a better wrestler than that, but like, we would kind of laugh at it. But he was a great leader, very charismatic. Very, very, we called him the mayor, very popular in the community. He knew everybody. He'd get up in the morning, like 4:00 in the morning, go to Gold's Gym, and he'd know every policeman, every firefighter, every person in the community knew him. And if you ran into anybody, it was like, oh, I knew your coach, Mark Johnson. Great guy. Love that guy. I mean, that's just the general, the entire town of Champaign, and really the entire, state of Illinois at that time, because we were, doing really well. And obviously he had big presence in Chicagoland suburbs and everything. But, man, he just knew everybody. And he treated everybody well, treated everybody with respect. My family always did this too, but I tell people about how Johnson always treated our equipment guys with respect. He would treat the AD and the equipment guys the same way. You know what I mean? It's not like, hey, this person's really important, I'm going to be nice to them. Oh, this person, is a janitor, they're not important. Like, everybody was important. They were all part of the process. So, our equipment guys loved us. I mean, we treat, he sort of set the standard with, hey, this is how, this is what we do.
Right.
This is how we treat people. Don't let me hear your, bad mouthing the equipment guy, your tutors, your academic advisor. Like, and you didn't want to get called in, believe me. You didn't want to get called in and, having a talk with you. And if you got in trouble, out at night, because it's college, right? I mean, you're going out and doing fun things, especially in the off season. He knew all the policemen. So It was like, you get in trouble, it goes right back to, them. And they would typically, they'd cut you a break because they liked him, but they'd go back and tell him, like, hey, listen, I got so-and-so, and then, you'd be in trouble. But like I said, his overall understanding of how to be a public figure, not a politician, but a public figure,
mm-hmm.
I think went a really, really long way with the wrestling program, because everybody liked our program, liked him, and were very supportive, and we got a lot out of that.
Man, how important is that in college wrestling now to have more people who are public figures who are doing things to promote and go above and beyond? You don't see it enough, I feel like, in my opinion.
No, I think it's everything. I really do. I mean, I think, like, I just was reading like Chris Bono and the jump around thing at Wisconsin, and I mean, just building that support in the community. I mean, listen, football has an army of people to do this stuff for them.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't, it would be important for them to do it as well. But they have a marketing department. They have all these people doing this stuff for them. Same with basketball, especially at the bigger schools. But, like, you have to be a face of the community. I mean, that's how you garner support. You don't know how many people supported Illinois wrestling that didn't have anything to do with Illinois wrestling. One of the guys who was probably our biggest supporters, still talk to today, was a horticulture professor and played basketball at Rutgers. He was one of our biggest supporters. And he had nothing to do with wrestling, but he loved the program. He got to meet Mark. He liked the way that, he liked us. And that's how you get support, because you're only going to grab so many wrestling coaches, high school wrestling coaches and current wrestlers. Like, how do you bring in other people to support, and especially your administration? How do you get them on board with wanting to support your program? And being a public figure and going. I mean, Mark would go. Again, I found this out later. We didn't know exactly what he was doing throughout the day, but I mean, he'd be at Rotary Club. He'd be speaking all week long at different things, out shaking hands, talking to people. So really learned a lot about just, not just coaching, but business, and how to make relationships and have that drive your business or your program.
I heard other people say Rob Cole very similar in that way. He's always out speaking, and look what he's done in 30 years. I mean, got to Cornell around the same time that Mark got to Illinois, maybe a few years earlier, and he's still there. But what a turnaround! And I had Mike Gray on the show last week, and he was saying that Coach Cole is still at like Rotary Club meetings and things like that, and just speaks to the kind of outreach that they have at those schools.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's so many of those guys. Like, I know Jack Spates used to, people used to always give Jack Spates, or at least in my circles, a hard time. Like, oh, Jack, he doesn't. Dude, Jack was a great coach. Like, let me tell you, Oklahoma has never been as good as when Jack Spates was there.
Right.
And he probably, again, was not your all-time, wrestling guru as far as knowledge of wrestling goes, but he got all the other stuff. He totally understood how to talk to people. He played guitar, how to sing. He did all kinds of stuff that people liked him. They wanted him around. They wanted to be part of the program. And when I was in college, Oklahoma was good.
Yeah.
I mean, every year they were, third, fourth, second, fifth in the country. And, a lot of bad mouthing of Jack, at least as far as I can remember, from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since Jack's been gone, they haven't done as well.
And they had a great RTC at those era, too.
Exactly. It's not all. I mean, again, it goes back to stupid wrestling and thinking you have to be, a national champion or an Olympic champion to be a good coach. Like that's just one small part. And these guys that get the other things, Brian Smith at Missouri is another one. Pat Papalozio has obviously done probably one of the best jobs I've ever seen in such a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Robinson, and the empire he built, again with his camps, but also Jay was very, he's a forward thinker. Willing to talk to people, willing to do things. Not quite the politician that some of these other guys were, but in a different way.
Putting the mat up on the big stage, bringing out the belts. I remember during your era when you were battling Lawrence, Iowa and Minnesota had some epic battles during that time as well, just because of the the history with J-Rob and Gable and Iowa, and it all kind of tied together. Now, one thing I did want to hit on is, you talk about the support that Mark Johnson was able to build at Illinois. I don't think any one event kind of showcase that more than the Iowa duel. And, I can't believe actually that you guys beat Iowa during this time. I thought it came later, but, take us into that duel. What grade are you in, and kind of what's the rankings of the team, and what's the scene there for everyone?
Boy, I'm not going to remember all of it, but basically I think we hadn't beat them in 43 years or some, and we'd mostly got stomped every time we wrestled them. And Iowa was, they're coming back now, and they've always been good, but they were at the top then. Iowa, and then Minnesota was just shortly on the, right after that. But yeah, basically they came into Huff Hall, and, we always had good support there. And, I think we reeled off the first, 4 or 5 wins, and then they had a bunch of studs down below.
Yeah.
Stripmatter and Juergens and Schwab and TJ Williams, who I wrestled. And yeah, it came down to 57 was the last match, and I wrestled TJ right down to the wire.
Let's pause there for a second. So you're a sophomore, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and the funny thing to me is that TJ, Illinois high school legend, went to JUCO in California. You went to high school in California, wrestled at Illinois. So at this point, though, like kind of coming into college, had you ever heard of the Williams name, or were all your teammates talking about how good these guys were since you went to school with a bunch of Illinois guys?
Okay, so you want to hear the TJ Williams story. So this is basically probably one of the reasons how I got to Illinois.
Oh, really?
So we were at the Junior Nationals wrestling, Fargo, which used to be the only game in town. I mean, it was, it still is a great tournament, there's no question. But, I mean, it was literally the only thing you could do.
Okay.
So, like, everybody showed up. Seniors showed up. Like, it was it. It wasn't this, sort of new age where there's always tournaments and, and the overseas stuff. So, anyway, we're at Fargo, And my dad, if you know my dad at all, he just walks up and starts randomly talking to coaches because that's what he does. So he walks up and starts talking to Johnson and introduces himself and, blah, blah, blah. And if you watch TJ, and I don't mean this as an insult because CJ was freaking unbelievable. If you ever wrestled him, you'd know why. But if you watch TJ wrestle, sometimes you would think that he's not that good because he doesn't do that much. I mean, yeah, he's got a good double leg. He's hard to score on. But kind of like Joe Williams, right? You watch him and you go, man, he doesn't always look that good, except for you can never beat him. Like, you just don't understand how good they are and how athletic they are and how hard it is to score on them. So I'm going to wrestle TJ in coming up in one of the later rounds. And apparently my dad said something like, basically to the same effect to Mark, like, hey, I know this Williams kid's supposed to be really good, but he just doesn't look like he's that good. And I think Mark turned to him and said, if your kid can even stay within 8 points of him, I'll be impressed. And I ended up losing like 8-7. It was like last second. TJ beat me every time. No matter, it was 8-7, 2-1, but he always beat me. But it was always super competitive, but he'd always end up on top. And so Mark and my dad were kind of sitting close to each other, and match happened, and I barely lost. And I think Mark was like, geez, everybody's recruiting this Williams kid. I think he kind of knew that he wasn't gonna be eligible right away for Division I level, and so that's kind of how the whole recruiting process started.
Wow.
Right there.
And
so I owe it to TJ.
I didn't know that backstory, and then fast forward probably 3-4 years at this point, you're ranked 8th as a sophomore. This match, you're not kidding when you say in the YouTube video. You have a great YouTube channel, by the way, but you weren't kidding when you say that it goes down to the wire. Oh my God! I mean, to me that was two. I mean, I don't know if you had it replay what would happen, but that thing literally came down to the wire.
Yeah, I don't know. I just always I remember being irritated, obviously, because I wanted to win and win it for the team. That would have solidified us winning. But I remember always thinking, like, if that was in Carver, he would have scored that 100 times out of 100. Like they would always get that call, and we're at home in front of our crowd, and like it's super close. There's no question it was super close. I mean, It definitely could have not been a takedown as well as it could have been a takedown. But we don't get it. And I'm like, okay. So you wrestle in their place, they always get it.
Yeah.
And in our place, we don't get it. So, yeah, no, it was it was a great match. And said every match I wrestled with TJ, they were always really good matches. He ended up always coming out on top, but just couldn't quite crack the code.
Well, he only lost one match ever in college, so obviously you're you have one of the best careers of that era as well. So no shame there. And kind of what I was getting at to the first question was, yeah, Huff Hall was 9,000 people. Illinois, who up until Johnson had taken over a few years early, caught 6-7 years earlier, wasn't even on the map. Now they beat Iowa, and this is during the decade. Like, Iowa won 9 of 10 titles in the 90s, even after Gabe Blood left. And this is 99, 2000-ish. So it's like unbelievable what Coach Johnson was able to do, and you were obviously a huge part of that. You lose, and the Nationals your junior year in overtime must have been a heartbreaking loss because you probably already felt that you were doing everything you could. Going into your senior campaign, where are you at mentally, like coming off of that Nationals and going into, like, are you the same or are you up another notch if that's even possible?
Yeah, I remember being really disappointed just because, again, if you haven't wrestled at that level, like, it's not like youth, and you see it every year now. It's not like, oh, you got second in the Nationals. Like, next year you'll be right back in the finals. Like, I mean, look how many guys have been multiple-time national champions and don't place as seniors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just that difficult, and wear and tear on your body and all the things that happen. So I just remember being really, really disappointed because I was so close to winning, and just knowing, hey, there's no guarantees. Like, I get hurt next year. I mean, anything could happen, and you don't get another shot. I mean, you get your couple of shots, and that's it. So I think that was probably my initial thought, and kind of sat on it for a week or so. But I just, remember thinking, hey, I talked to our little student reporter, at the end of the tournament there, and I remember telling her, like, hey, I got 365 more days till next NCAA championship, so I'm gonna be ready.
Yeah.
Like, this will be my last one. So do everything from now till then, get prepared, and and let chips fall where they may.
So you just went right back into it. And outside of the physical work, which, we can all probably imagine how grueling that was. You seem like a pretty cerebral guy. Were you doing a lot of visualization or any type of meditation during that time to kind of get those mental reps in?
I think I don't know. I think just frame. I remember thinking a lot about how do you position, how do you think about it in your mind? Like, is this like your last chance in a negative? Is it glass half full or glass half empty? Is it like your last opportunity, and if you don't make it, you've blown it? Like, your career was for nothing? Or the way I tried to look at it was, I love doing this. Like, I'm not going to be able to do this after this year. I love being a part of the team. I love wrestling in front of our fans. I love wrestling in front of big crowds at the NCAAs. Like, this is my last opportunity, but not an opportunity to win, but opportunity to perform, opportunity to enjoy this experience. And sometimes you lose track of that, instead of the OCD and how hard it is. And, you're driving. And I've heard a lot of athletes say it too, that, you kind of lose perspective and forget to enjoy at least the, what you're around, because it'll be gone in a heartbeat. I mean, it's been 20 some years since I wrestled, and I mean, not quite since the nationals, but 20 some years since high school, and about 20 years since college now, getting close. And so I just looked at it like last opportunity. That, hey, I love doing this. Try to keep it positive. I think I had a better frame, around the season. I did end up getting beat in the Big Tens, and I don't think I let that affect me maybe the way it would have in a previous year. I do remember talking to Johnson at the beginning of the year and saying I was going to take it a little slower, which he didn't necessarily agree with, but I think he understood that I knew what I was doing at this point. And I just said, hey, I've won everything else, man. I've won back then it was St. Louis Open, Missouri Open. Won the Vegas tournament. I was outstanding wrestler, I think, as a junior. I've won everything. Like, I've won the Big Ten. The only thing I haven't won is the Nationals. I want to go a little bit slower, not quite be so top form, in November, December, and try to build into that for February and March. And, we're end up working out.
Man, I'd say so. I mean, in the finals, you had Lawrence, who you guys had battled the previous year in the semis. And as I was watching that match, when you beat him in the semis, it was at Carver. I'm like, why is everyone cheering so much for Tirapelle? But then I realized that Iowa and Minnesota were in that team battle your junior year. So yeah. You were no stranger to Lawrence. And I think, at one point in the third, you had Granby'd out. You were up 3-1. You must have known that it wasn't all but over, but you were in the driver's seat. Yeah, how do you coach your wrestlers in those type of situations when you're up 3-1? Is it kind of the go, or wrestle smart and tactically at that point in those super, super high-stakes matches?
Yeah, I think you always want to be, there's definitely a tactical element to wrestling.
Right.
Anybody who says there's not just doesn't get it, because, you want to wrestle hard, there's no question, but it has to be dictated a little bit by, by the score and what's going on. But I think it's more, again, that glass half full, glass half empty. Are you trying to protect your lead, or are you thinking that, hey, I score one more time, this match is over? And that's kind of where I try to get wrestlers, and it's kind of how I thought of it, and what Mark and Jim would always say, hey, put the match away, ice the match. You score one more time, like, they basically given up. I mean, they know they're not going to take you down 3 times. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So rather than try to hold on, then get down to where you're, okay, 30 seconds left, they score, you don't get away, now you're in overtime, try to put the match away. Try to be aggressive, smart aggressive, but don't shift into a defensive mode. You can do that in the last 10 seconds of the match. Still got to keep wrestling. But until then, like, hey, be thinking, I score, they give up. This is the end of the match. So that's kind of the mindset.
That's kind of where you're at there. And, after the Nationals, you've had probably, and maybe even more successful of a career after wrestling. You have the SEMA as a financial advisor, which is extremely rare. I used to work at Salesforce, and we sold to a lot of RIAs. And didn't come across too many that had that. So that's obviously a huge feather in your cap. But then as a coach, one of the most accomplished high school coaches of the past 15, 20 years, and I would like to spend the next 10 minutes on this as we wind down, but let's just start with this program. I don't even know what it is, so I'm genuinely curious. What is the Winter Circle program, and is that just the way you run your high school program, or is that a separate academy you run? Kind of talk us through that.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was I came back from I finished wrestling, went to grad school, got my MBA, ended up doing some investment banking stuff in Southern California for about a year and a half. Ended up, as life would have it, things happened. I ended up back in this area, and started helping my dad coach a little bit, just on the side. Well, for Clovis High, this is right after my youngest brother graduated. And so kind of stables had emptied a little bit. They'd kind of, and we were down. I mean, we were just not as good. Now, imagine where I'm coming from at a wrestling level and a competition level, now back to high school. No matter how good you are, it's still a massive difference. So we wrestled that year, and we weren't very good, relatively speaking. And I just remember being really frustrated because, number one, we weren't that good, but it was just such a different level than what I was used to, as far as training and intensity and goals and everything. So after the season, I was like, I basically was like, I don't give a shit. Like, we're gonna do something that, this is what it takes to be successful at this sport. Like, I'll show you what it takes, but this is what it's going to be. So I ended up calling it the Winter Circle. It was basically just taking that college level training and sort of modifying it a little bit for the high school level, but also having an expectation around it that, hey, if you're going to do this, like if I'm going to do it with you, you're going to do it and you're going to buy in. Like, and it was one of the things I learned about high school kids, and it taught me a lot about coaching, is that they don't always want to do stuff, but more than that, they definitely don't want to be told they can't do stuff. So one of the things with the Winter Circle was you had to be there beginning 70% of the time. So like it was off season. Now again, this isn't Division I wrestling. This is high school. So
right.
It was off season, and we would have weightlifting, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we'd wrestle Tuesday, Thursday, but you had to be there. Basically call it 4 out of 5 days. At least 4 out of 5 days every other week.
Is this the summer? Or is this like the spring semester?
This is the spring.
Okay.
This is the spring and then into the summer.
Okay.
And I thought, man, we maybe have like 4 or 5 kids that want to do this. And that's fine. I didn't care. Like, hey, I'll work with the 4 or 5 that want to be good. Well, we ended up with like 20-some kids. And like it was just a really eye-opening experience that they'll do a lot more than you think they'll do if you have an expectation and you're willing to do it with them. Basically, you're willing to give, they're willing to give. But they didn't want to be kicked out. Like nobody wanted to, they don't want to be told you can't come. Because that was my thing. Like most coaches had always done like, hey, we're going to do off-season training. Hey, come when you can come. And I was like,
open mat, like, yeah.
Yeah, no. See, I'm not an open mat guy because I got to get over there from work and go in the wrestling room, and I feel like I'm volunteering my time and experience, that I've learned over the years, which is pretty decent, I would say. And hey, I have a lot to offer you, but you're going to commit to doing this, or you're not, or you're out. I don't want you here. I don't want you coming in when you can come in. I don't want you weightlifting when you can weightlift. I want you either deciding I want to do this, and this is what not that it's the only thing I'm going to do, but I'm committed to doing this because I want to be good, or I'm not committed to doing this, and that's fine. Either way, you make a commitment, but you're just not going to wake up every day and decide whether you feel like coming to practice or not. And so anyway, that was kind of how the Winter Circle started. So I just called it the Winter Circle because it was like, hey, you're in this thing now, you're going to be in the Winter Circle later. Like,
I love it.
That's what it was. And kind of took on a life of its own. I mean, amazing how these things like sort of morph. That was my idea, that I was just going to work with kids who wanted to do it. And years later, I mean, we have 50 kids. I mean, we got kids that are on campus that like beg to get in the Winter Circle. I'm like, who are you? Do you even wrestle? No, I just want to get in the Winter Circle. It's like, no, you can't get in the Winter Circle. You don't wrestle.
Jeez.
But it just became like this thing where everybody wanted to be in it because, we did. I mean, I basically took the college lifting program that we had, which one of the things we were really, really known for at Illinois. We had great lifting. Johnson was a weightlifting guy. We had great strength training. And so I basically took our program and I would talk to our strength coach and go, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Like, I got to modify a few of these things. We don't have all the equipment that obviously a university has, but here's what it is. And I mean, it's legit. And I know my brother does it with Buchanan now. Same program. He went to Illinois, same program. And so, I mean, most guys think they, even our football team, go in, do a couple sets of bench, couple sets of squats, maybe a few cleans, and that's a workout. Like, that's a warm up. Like our weight training when I was there was an hour and a half. I mean, an hour and a half hard.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're shot when you're done. And so that's basically what we tried to bring to the high school level. That, hey, this is what it's about. Like, you want to lift weights? This is a weight training program. You want to go over to GB3 and screw around? We got George Brown's. You want to go over to the gym and screw around, or you want to go through a circuit? By all means, go for it. But you're not going to get what you need.
And so would you do that in the afternoon or in the morning for the off-season program?
We did afternoon. We did after school. We even did it late, so because we wanted kids to be able to do their track or baseball or whatever else they had. Like, it wasn't about give up everything you do in life and just wrestle. It was about, if you want to be good at wrestling, I've been good at wrestling. I know what it takes to be good at wrestling. This is what it takes to be good at wrestling. So if you want to be good, we'll offer it to you, and you can still do other things too. Still do your spring football, or because most kids obviously are doing more than one thing. So that was how it started, and I think we did it when we first started. I think we did it like 7 at night, like 7 to 8:30. Of course, I wasn't married, didn't have kids back then, and
yeah,
I could just live the sport, So it was like 7 to 8:30, and I think we even went Friday before school, which is like ridiculous for the kids, super early. So we go Friday before school, and I bring in donuts a lot of times for them, and it was an awesome thing. It was sort of my my family until I got my own family.
But man, to have a young coach to put in that kind of hours in the off season is unbelievable. It's something you rarely see.
Oh
so
yeah,
obviously
just lived it.
Lived it. I mean, God, one of the biggest things I've realized is if you find those obsessive people, you are, and I am about this podcast, finding a partner who's cool with the obsession is one of the biggest battles you ever find in life. that is a huge thing. It's kind of an area that I don't think is explored that well in some of the literature about how people who are extremists or obsessive people can live happily with others who aren't. Because sometimes I'm sure you see that at work. I mean, you probably work around a lot of successful people, but not all of them are ultra winners. So how do you deal with that when you see someone who is kind of giving it half-assed? Is it hard for you not to judge them, or? And this doesn't even have to do with wrestling. I'm just curious.
Yeah, what we do, we're basically doing our own thing. So you can say I started our own, our own RAA, which again, so the podcast is how wrestling has changed my life. For me, it's more how it shaped my life. It was never really an option. It wasn't like I was not a wrestler and then all of a sudden I became a wrestler. Like, I always grew up around the sport, but I didn't realize how many things that wrestling would affect in my life after wrestling. And I mean, everything I have. I mean, it's literally the old, Kevin Bacon, like 6 degrees of separation. You can always tie it back to wrestling. Like, the clients I have, how I come in contact with them, to, doing this business. I mean, so my business partner's right across the way here, and literally we started working together. So we were both at Merrill Lynch. I was brand new. He's a couple years older than me, so we're both fairly young. And he liked MMA. And we weren't doing anything together. We were just in the same office, and just came up one day. I happened to mention, oh yeah, I know some of those guys, and he's like, oh, how do you know them? And I was like, well, I wrestled in college. Like, it was Josh Koscheck and some of the originals that were that were doing the MMA fighting. I'm like, Gray Maynard. I'm like, yeah, I wrestled with those guys. Like, I know them really well. And so we started talking. Invited him to come to our Clovis Buchanan match just because I said, hey, this is an MMA, but you'll see kind of where these guys come from, how this whole thing develops, and this is how they get into the fighting later, because this is basically fighting without the punching. And so if you know Chris, he'll try anything. So he basically says, I'll come. So he showed up, freaking really liked it, started showing up more. We started doing business together. A few years later, we left Merrill Lynch, ended up going to Wells, and then 10 years after that, we started our own RIA together. And so literally it all came from me having wrestled with some of these guys who did MMA. I mean, and it always goes like that. So wrestling has just done everything for me. It's opened all the doors. It's taught me not to be afraid. Like I said, just doing this, doing this RIA. Like, I mean, we left all of our clients behind. like literally, midsummer. We left everything behind, started a new venture, hoping that, thinking, but again, on day one, you got nobody. Hoping that, hey, people feel the same way that you feel. And, but I think wrestling, again, gave me that ability, that confidence, that, listen, I've wrestled in front of tons and tons of people. I've been in way more stressful situations. Like, this is a big move for me, for my business partner, for my family. But it was like, I believed in myself. I believed in us, and that, hey, we can do this. I've done other stuff that's harder than this. We can do this. And so that's kind of how. I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. That's perfect.
For me, it's wrestling has been everything, and that's why I try to give back to the sport where I can, because it does so much more for you than just the wrestling.
Right.
And now that I'm older and 20 years out of the sport, you start to realize all the things that it really did for you.
When I could go hours with this conversation, but we'll let you go because I know you have a busy schedule. Where can people find you online? And if there are some folks who are potential clients of a wealth manager, how can they find you and your firm? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So we started our own firm. It's Strong Valley Wealth and Pension. It's simple. StrongValley.com. If you want to look me up there, you can. It doesn't have to be just for wealth management. I'm happy to talk wrestling with people, as you can see by social media. I'm always excited to get on.
Love your Twitter.
Well, I like to talk about things that are bigger than, to me, big parts of the sport. Like we talked a little bit about the youth development and things like that. And it's just changed so much, and sport's always evolving and changing, and you just have to be willing to change with it. That's a big debate. I know people go back and forth on it, and I'm not against youth wrestling by any means. I think it's, wrestling is great for kids. It's driven a lot more by adults now than it used to be. And it's driven a lot more by trinkets and awards and winning and losing than it used to be. I mean, sports has always been about competition, but when it just becomes about winning, then you lose some of the what you're gaining from the sport. And I think that's what drives the kids out more, is that not that they don't love wrestling, but like the pressure to, be successful or win this award or get to this weight class. And, it ends up becoming a negative instead of a positive. And I want to see as many people stay with it as possible.
Those parents need those Tulsa trophies, though, man. Let's sympathize with the parents. No, I'm kidding. They're freaking nut jobs.
You know what? And the thing is, I'm sure there's some good people there. But I've seen it. So my kid plays baseball too, and starting to play at a higher level, and you see it, like, no matter what level you're at, there's always a higher level, and there's always somebody willing to take it to that next level. And well, if you're in rec ball, then you could play all stars, and if you're in all stars, you can play travel ball. Well, if you're in travel ball, you can play elite travel ball, and then you can play all year round and not do anything else. And then it's crazy, and the parents, they're afraid. If you don't know any better, see, wrestling, I know better, so I'm not concerned about it. Like, my kid's not the greatest wrestler; he's a fourth grader. Like, but he'll be all right, and he's going to figure it out, and things will happen. But I know it's a long process where the parents who don't know, like, they're just afraid they're falling behind. So it's just this constant, need to keep up with the Joneses. And next thing you know, your kid's only doing baseball. He's doing it 5 days a week. He plays 8. I mean, it's warm out here. I mean, people start baseball out here in beginning of February, and they go into December. That's the travel ball season.
For 8-year-olds?
Oh, yeah. 8, 9, 10, yeah.
Oh, man.
But it's similar to what you're saying with the wrestling, and hey, there's a lot of good things to come out of Tulsa and wrestling against higher level kids, but you've seen the other side of it, and then keeping up with those people and feeling like you're falling behind. You need more matches, you need more mat time, and you need more training, and it sort of devolves into into a side path.
Yeah, I can imagine, because when you talk to someone who's been a winner at the highest level, they're never the parents that are crazy like that. I think across all sports, you usually see that parents who played collegiately or played professionally, they're never that crazy parent. At least in my experience, I've rarely seen that. So it's good to have people like you working with our kids. And last question for you is, when is the big duel with Buchanan? that we can all tune
Oh
into?
man, I think we're February 6th this year. So this is how me and my brother work. So they changed up our league schedule this year, and literally we didn't know about it. And the date they wanted us to wrestle ended up being like right after the Doc B, and right after Doc B, they go out of state, and then that week we're supposed to wrestle, and then we go out of state, and we were both just like, this isn't gonna work. It wasn't good for them. It wasn't good for us. And again, the way we built this thing is, we want it to be a great experience. Like, we don't want one team shorthanded or the other team shorthanded. Like, the whole idea is to put on a good show and show the area what kind of wrestling we have here. And so anyway, so we ended up agreeing to move it to a later date. So we're gonna do it, I think, February 6th this year.
February 6th. It's on Flow?
Yeah, I think it's on Flow.
Perfect. Well, that's exciting. Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoy it. The hour flew by. Would love to have you back on at some point to talk about coaching and that whole umbrella, which we didn't get to. So thank you for your time and have a great day, sir.
No problem.